far as black men are concerned, we're the canaries in the mine on this. You know what I mean? In terms of the black community, we've dealt with feminization much longer.
Doctor, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about your background in terms of education and how you kind of were started to seen as like one of the main faces of the studying of masculinity and specifically Black masculinism.
Oh man. Well, let me see. Bachelor's in Africana Studies and Philosophy out of Cal State Dominguez Hills, master's in African American Studies, Temple University, doctorate in Cultural Studies out of Claremont Graduate University. And I've been teaching here at Fresno State for 17 years. I've been teaching university level for 27.
Nice.
I started teaching university level at 21 years old. So, it started out pretty young. So it's almost 30 years as far as that. But I didn't actually start focusing on Black males in my research until after I got to Fresno State. And, prior to that, I'd only pretty much been introduced to Black feminism as far as gender was concerned. So it wasn't until after that I started doing that research and really discovering what wasn't said about Black males. So that went on for a number of years. And then I ran into Dr. Tommy Curry, and then we have a small cadre of brothers that, helped kind of formulate Black male studies. And Tommy kicked it all off with the Man Not. And we've all just been working to build from there. So there's a small group of a growing number of Black male scholars that have been coming up, getting doctorates in writing, putting out books. And, that's the work we've been doing. So that's probably been, I think I met Tommy maybe 11, 12 years ago, something like that. So we've been kicking it off from there. So, that's kind of how it's been, how it started, and it's kind of where it's going. But a lot of it was really just on the ground. I mean, I started teaching a Black male studies class before we had that terminology here at Fresno State. And I mainly was doing it because I saw how Black males were being treated. I saw they didn't have much support, particularly here at Fresno. And I've told this story before, but the very first day that I taught the class, I hadn't even walked into the room yet. There was a military recruiter and there was a police detective at the front door waiting for me. And I didn't even know who was taking my class yet. Hadn't opened the door, had no idea who was sitting in there. The military recruiter wanted to, before I even gave my first lecture, he wanted to take the stage to invite some of my students to join the military and leave college. And the other guy was looking for a brother who was accused of knocking over a liquor store. And he wanted me to go in and point him out. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because it framed why Black male studies was so necessary. Because even in regard to how the public engaged us, the way they saw us was either somebody that needs to be, in the military or somebody that needs to go to jail. And that was before the first lecture was given. That was before I could even look at the students in my class. So that was the context for what really started to get me into this, made me want to push more.
Wow. That makes sense. And in hindsight, a lot of the guys that we're thinking of, like you, Dr. Tommy Curry, and others, we didn't realize the need for this until you guys actually put it out there, because we were all experiencing something when we grew up in certain environments in our home. We didn't realize what was actually happening to boys and men, especially to like Black boys and men. It was just what everybody was kind of used to. And I'm sure as we dive into it and we kind of get to the gist of what those nuances were, it'll start to flesh out more for the audience what it is that why this was such an important thing to actually create a study out of. Recently, a lot more people over the last month or two have been talking so much about a woman by the name of Helen Andrews. Right? And she did an essay rather, and she spoke, and it was on the great feminization of Western civilization.
Right.
I was extremely impressed with how nuanced and in-depth she was about it, and how she was able to scale it and track what it did and how it changed and morphed over time. What were your initial thoughts about her, the great feminization of Western civilization presentation? Like, what do you think about it? What did she get right? Just overall, what was your opinion about it?
Well, my first thought, I was surprised. I mean, I'm like, this is a conservative white woman, and they're kicking. I mean, because it's more than her. I mean, there were some white women scholars I ran into last year on YouTube that have done some work, and they were talking about feminization in the academy and whatnot, and they were as critical as she. I think hers was more general. They were more
Mm,
specific to the academy, but I was still blown away that this conversation is coming out of women and on the right. I didn't see any of that coming. It really kind of blindsided me. And the nature of the critique was sound,
mhm,
addressing the shift in the culture in institutions to practices that are more accessible and practiced more so by women. I didn't expect that at all. I was blown
mm,
away by it. But after the initial kind of shock from it, when I thought about it, I said, well, as far as black men are concerned, we're the canaries in the mine on this. You know what I mean? In terms of the black community, we've dealt with feminization much longer,
mm,
in a different kind of way. So, I wanted to, in my last show, just really start off and have a conversation about how much I appreciate where feminization is going as a critique, as a means of analyzing what's going on in everything from the job market to workplace climate to politics and so on and so forth. But there's always a unique kind of shift in the black community from the larger mainstream because we kind of run into things differently. We have a different history, we have a different narrative. And so I kind of always want to maintain how we were introduced to these ideas. So whereas you have white folk who are really starting to examine this question of feminization within the last 5 years, in terms of how Helen Andrews framed it, we can talk about it going back to the 1970s and 80s in popular media. We can talk about it in terms of the workplace and the schools. We can talk about graduation rates, graduate school. There's so many different areas where
mhm,
we can have this conversation where, as you said earlier, I saw these things, but I didn't really have a frame of reference for what I was seeing. I just saw
mm.
them. I just experienced them. There's, like, for example, just off the cuff, there's been no college campus I've been to, as far as black students and faculty are concerned, where I've seen more men than women. Not one. I never thought about that. I just went
Yeah,
to school.
yeah, yeah,
I
at
didn't
least, would you say in the last, like, what, 20, 30 years?
yeah,
Probably.
about the last 30. Yeah. I started college in 92. Um,
Mm,
Everywhere I saw it was more, but I didn't even process that at the time. I
same.
really came to that in retrospect when I thought about it, but I just accepted what I saw and I left it at that. I had no idea about what the implications of that were, and how that even affected, college professors in terms of black men and black women and how that would play out. So these kinds of things she's pointing to as far as feminization is concerned, for a lot of us, it's going to be a lot of retrospection that needs to kind of take place. We're going to have to go back and recount because for us, it's been something we can acknowledge for much longer
Mhm,
than some of these other groups. And so, and that doesn't necessarily have to, kick off any negativity. It's just acknowledging what is.
mhm.
And so I think Andrews kind of opened a door to a conversation that we were touching on in these black spaces on YouTube, but I think she kind of framed it on a larger scale, and that
Mm.
allows us to kind of open that discussion up.
I appreciate that. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you felt like black boys and men were experiencing this great feminization of a particular culture or society earlier.
Mhm.
What examples can you give to kind of explain, especially for those who are hearing the whole great feminization of Western civilization? They're probably hearing this for the first time. Like
Mhm.
may have heard about like gender wars. They may have heard about like men and women not getting along and the divorce rates. But from the starting with the black community, and then we can kind of extrapolate or go to like the general population. What did you note of examples of what black boys and men were experiencing in terms of the feminization of the culture?
Well, a lot of it started with the exclusion of black boys, for example. I'll give you an example. Matter of fact, in the comment section of my last video, there's a brother that gets in there and he says, "I have a young son, and I was trying to find books, children's books for my son." He said, "I couldn't find any, but every one I did find were targeted for girls." Right? I've had other fathers, and I went through this when my son was young, looking for everything from after school programs to programs designed for black boys. Overwhelmingly, of the programs we found, they were targeted for girls. These are the kinds of low level things we started to kind of notice, right? If you talk about the pedagogy in the K through 12 classroom, much of it, and this is across race, much of it is fixated on defining the ideal student really as female. It's not targeted for boys. And so you kind of see how the impact has been. If you look at the graduation rates in the last 10 to 20 years, they're overwhelmingly more female than male, especially when you talk about those who are going to into higher education as far as college is concerned. So you see these trends in different spaces. One of my main areas has been media analysis. And that started out because I was just teaching about stereotypes and it was something I was drawn to. And as an 80s latchkey kid, my sister and I, all we did was watch movies.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it wasn't until retrospect that I started to really pay attention to what I'd grown up watching. But in this kind of framework from the 1980s onward, you talk about Black men and women, and the narratives and experiences and even complaints that we have about everything from dating to marriage to so on and so forth. Black men really didn't have a platform on the same kind of scale that we saw happen with women. I mean, we had hip hop, we had comedy, they had Steven Spielberg directed movies. I mean, it was a global stage for a visual narrative about the experiences of Black women. You didn't see that same kind of access for Black men. Much of the time, we had to wait for Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, somebody else to say something that we kind of could have aligned with, but we didn't have a platform
Mm-hmm.
on that scale that we could really speak to. So there's so many different areas where you start to see this, but pulling them together wasn't the easiest thing to do because despite experiencing it, I really hadn't thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about whether or not you've ever had a Black male studies course, let alone degree, for those of you who went to college, it's not something you normally saw, right? You saw women's studies, you saw Africana studies, which in many ways is kind of overwhelmed in some respects with Black feminism. You really didn't see a framework for Black male studies. This is why it had to be introduced and created. The belief was anything that was happening in Africana studies, for example, or Black studies outside of Black feminism was somehow considered masculine and whatnot. But it really wasn't. And when you really start to go through, particularly The Man Not with Tommy Curry's book, you really start to see what conversation has not been happening about Black males. That's when you first begin to really pay attention to it and see what's been missing. So, that kind of focus is outside the discussion. So those are just some examples. If you want to talk about the percentage of male teachers versus female teachers from kindergarten through graduate school, what the differences are there in terms of that. And of course, especially in the Black world, the Black Academy, those are some of the differences we notice as well. So these kinds of differences in terms of whose narratives, whose voices are where, how they're acknowledged, what frame they're in, and who predominates in, physical numbers in some of these spaces, it varies. But much of the time, you notice in retrospect how, especially the higher up you go, you tend to be the only male in the room, or at least that was the experience I had, and many of my cohort colleagues had the same kinds of experiences in the places they were in. And to this day, I still get Black males finishing doctorates, working on doctorates at various stages of it. I think I'm sitting on about 5 or 6 different doctoral committees. I got one Thursday who's actually defending, but I'm on about 5 or 6 of them because these males are looking to deal with Black males in their research, but they're being attacked sometimes by their own committee, sometimes by their own committee chair, because for the most part, it's Black feminists that are the only ones there, and they're kind of dealt with in a very hostile fashion, and they're looking for ideological support and academic support, intellectual support, so that they can rationalize doing the work they want to do without being kicked out. And I've had a few of them experience that as well. But just trying to find resources not only on Black men, but Black male scholars willing to talk about Black male studies, there's a dearth of that aspect